Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We were just told by FCAT this, which
Wow.
means we're broadcasting live. This
the
is
better
a
finger.
specially scheduled, it is true actually, a specially scheduled meeting of the Sunderland Board of Selectmen. Yesterday was a municipal holiday, so we're gonna talk tonight about, we're gonna approve some minutes. We're going to do very brief updates and then talk about our budget line items, capital line items, and we have, I think, 4 motions that we have to review. They were all centered around finances, and this is a carryover from last week. So we can take a quickly look at the minutes of the 14th of April. How come when we want quick minutes, they're 2 pages long?
I know, right? Well, they're comprehensive,
They
without
are
a doubt.
indeed. And again, this was a review of the motions last week, as well as a meeting with Town of Leverett about the potential for
That's right.
shared fire services.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion that's made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Excuse me, 3-0. That is for the minutes of the 14th.
Someday, someone in the future will greatly appreciate
Oh,
that.
you're
When
not
they're going
kidding.
through, you know?
Oh, it's
That's-
true.
We have gone back towards minutes as a resource so often it's second
Right.
nature.
Yep.
Good points. Okay, are there any selectmen's updates themselves? Anything happened between class and now? Tom?
Yeah, we had another Board of Oversight ambulance meeting. Actually had 2. The first one was on the startup of the system. It appears what's gonna happen on May 1st, the Deerfield ambulance will start running South County calls, paramedic service.
So they'll be leaving their place now, answering for the 3 communities.
So what'll happen is that right now they have 16 hours a day paramedic service. When a call comes in for Sunderland, Deerfield, Whately, when the call comes in, it'll be routed to Deerfield.
Yeah.
Deerfield will make the response.
Okay.
If a second ambulance is needed, what will happen is that they'll tone out the towns, either Sunderland or Whately, and if it's in Deerfield, Sunderland and Whately will cover Deerfield.
It's
Can
basically
you say that last piece again, please?
Okay.
If a second call comes in,
Who's gonna cover? Sunderland and Whately will cover Deerfield.
okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just the design of the system, so just rolling it out.
It's kinda like a soft opening,
Right, working your way up towards it.
right?
Yep, that's a good way to do
You've
it.
got a lot to overcome.
I
that.
bet.
I don't know why it's gonna be a hard thing. It took a lot of discussion the other night, but I think that's what's gonna happen. Subject to change, because we have another meeting Thursday night,
Yeah.
so I'm sure something may have come up someplace.
Anything else? That's big, if you think about that, this, even if it's a soft rollout of paramedic level service for the 3 communities, the goal is to reduce the number of intercepts, provide 24/7, in a perfect world, 24/7 level paramedic service and EMT level backup. If we're doing a soft start and you're working up toward that, that's progress. It doesn't feel like it when you're in the trenches, though.
There was questions from the new director and by the fiscal agent. And they're good questions. And the director kind of wants everything to kind of be perfect. And we work in the real world, and I think perfection is something you strive for, unless you're Bob Doobie, you're not perfect.
Yeah.
You know? Well, it's true. Have you ever had any of his decisions at town meeting challenged? And they haven't,
He
right,
does
Bob?
he always manages to come out on top as a moderator.
Always, every time. I've never known a moderator to lose a vote, so. So I think, and the town of Deerfield would benefit the town of Deerfield because now they have a revenue source for their ambulance system. 49% of being paid,
By Whately and Sunderland, yeah?
right.
Great point.
So I think it'll be okay. So there's some things that have to be worked out, but I think it'll be okay.
David, you have anything?
No,
We're gonna have our springtime meeting next week, and we're working on our last day schedule with the town of Amherst about the Sugar Bush Meadows property.
oh,
We'll see what happens with that. That's happening. David Zomek and I have been in contact.
it's good.
Okay, town administrator updates.
I don't have anything to report, except it's been constant budget and town meeting work.
It is that week.
Yes,
That time of
It
year.
is that week.
yes.
All right, well, let's get right after it then. So, the actual budget itself is the next agenda item, and we left our last meeting with a budget gap of $90,000+. Margaret, if you would mind, if we could go down through the steps that got us to today's number. Then we can talk about the actual number. Elementary school, of course, had a meeting.
Yes. Yep.
Go right ahead.
Okay, so the elementary school committee on the 15th voted to reduce its budget by, tell you 1 second, it was by $42,980, if I'm not mistaken. I apologize, I don't have that exact. Oh, actually, you know what, maybe I do. I just have to go down the electronic file here.
And that was for the FY15, correct?
I don't, yes, it
Yes.
was FY 15, but I believe the number is 42,980. It's very close to that. It brings down their operating budget growth to 1.7%, and their total growth for the elementary school budget, including transportation, to 0.9%. I did more work on the town side, and, you know, there are little additional reductions, and then there are bigger additional reductions. On the tax collector treasurer's operating budget, we reduced, and I did consult with the treasurer collector on this, we reduced the expense line by $722, which would be the implementation fee for the payroll system. And technology, the board's technology line would absorb that $722 in the first year. The town clerk has some funds in her polling place reimbursement fund, and she is able to reduce the elections registration expense line by $1,500.
1,500, Margaret?
By $1,500. Town buildings, the public safety complex operating budget line. I ran, an analysis on Friday, ran this by the fire chief, and we are able to keep that line level funded for FY16, so that would reduce the request by $216. Town building maintenance, this has now been reduced 2 times since we started working on this budget cycle. This reduces it to just over the FY14 level. It increases the FY14 by $330, so the request now is $12,000. $330 would be available to fund unexpected repairs at the town buildings.
As long as it's not a big one.
No, as long as it's not a big one. That line originally had a property manager contract and additional, I can't remember, I think it was $2,500 of funding that would be available to do plumbing repairs, heating repairs, things like that. So now it's $330. Just for the board's information, under the police department budget, the finance committee had recommended increasing the part-time officer wages by the chief's requested, I think, $15,000, but the board hasn't made that change at this point. Under the fire department, there were a number of expense lines that were increased based on inflation, 3% inflation rates. So I went through all of those, talked with the fire chief, and those are all going to be level funded. You'll see these throughout. So the fire department expense line will be level funded at $12,000. That's taking $360 out of the request. Regional EMS has been fine-tuned to reflect the actual formula assessment. The civil defense line is another one of those lines that had kind of an automatic 3% increase. That has now been level funded, so that reduces the request by $135. Okay, here are some biggies. Chapter 720, unemployment. I ran an analysis on that for the past couple of years. If there are any changes or any increases in unemployment claims at the start of the fiscal year, we would likely not see that till mid-year. And so I am proposing at this point level funding it instead of increasing it by $3,000. I think, we have to be prepared for possible changes in that if there are any changes in employment status. Another line that we have tried to keep funding in for many years, ever since I've been here, is the town employees medical line. That line has historically been funded based on the actual enrollment plus an additional, a potential additional single plan, employee plus one plan, and family plan. I have taken out all of that padding except for the possibility of up to 2 single plans, and so I've reduced that by $10,000. And again, it's important to keep in mind any changes in that may require reserve fund transfers. Town insurance, again, I ran an analysis on that, and as of today, we were chasing down the insurance company, making sure our premiums would remain low, and we're able, as long as we receive the insurance credits and the rewards points, we can reduce that request by $28.52. Town park, that was another 3% increase. That's just the request is reduced by $53. And that is about it. So the gap now with the schools reductions and municipal reductions, we are down. Well, we had been down. I should have probably kept the old number in for free cash so you could actually see what it would show. We were down to a gap of 26,000. It's got you 247 something. 249. 26,249.
And the free cash number is 119,256.
And that was the old number. The number that's plugged in right now reflects additional use of free cash, and the board can discuss that. That's free cash guidelines say 30% of the certified free cash, which would have been 119,256. So with additional use of free cash of 26,249, there would be no gap at this point.
So over the course of the week, elementary school administration, business manager met, voted down. We started the week at $97,000 and finished the week at 26,249. Again, the elementary school went a long way, and our work here inside our offices and department heads, level funding or reducing, gets us down to this area. So the question about our operating budget as we go on to the motions deals with the free cash guidelines. Was a consensus guideline that the finance committee, treasurer, collector, accountant, our office worked toward to ensure that free cash wasn't, the use of free cash was established in a formulaic manner. We didn't just leap from year to year. And so the last couple of years, we've essentially used it in thirds, third for the operating budget, a third to preserve for the prior year, for the upcoming year, and then the final third we've moved to capital stabilization, and then moved back out of funding capital, figuring it's a more volatile revenue stream than something that's raised and appropriate. This year, as we go through the budget, you're going to see that between warrant articles, the strong desire to preserve free cash for the upcoming year, and this budget gap, we may not be able to move money into capital stabilization, but that's coming up as we walk through the motions. So that's the current budget gap as we have it right now. Okay, so while we're talking about budgets with respect to capital, We have a big capital sheet in front of us. Capital is, $1 million worth of wants, $6,000 worth of reality. And if you look capital funding by source, we know pretty clearly that capital stabilization has a balance of $19,000, somewhere in the $19,000 range. And again, that's moved in and supported from prior years' free cash, closed out projects, et cetera. We had a $1.2 million proposed capital budget in front of us. Some of them were long range or pent up, and others certainly could be worked on, but without the revenue stream to support it, the only real piece of capital work that's in front of us that has a funding source is the sewer reserve, and the use of those monies at the treatment plant is prescribed by the operating engineer. So as we look at the capital budget, I guess I'd like to have that discussion now, because we're gonna move into the motions piece. At first blush, there's not $327,000 for total stabilization use, total capital stabilization use to meet the demand for the capital requests. I would say that if anything, this is another example of, this is an annual example, not another, an annual example of the importance of funding capital on an annual basis in a programmatic way. There is a ballot question in front of us in the general election coming up, and I really encourage people to get out there and participate in the vote, recognizing the kind of challenges that we've had for capital.
The starting balance in capital stabilization is $19,527, and the requests total from capital stabilization total $327,772.
So we're not gonna get involved in that gap analysis. There's just way too big. And many of those items, even if you bundled them and tried borrowing, from a statute perspective, you're not necessarily allowed to. So, the next one down is the sewer reserve. That's pretty much a no-brainer. And then there are some borrowing availabilities inside of our current debt limit. We've not explored that. Margaret's done wonderful work identifying what some of those things are eligible to be borrowed for. And then we have some grants and CPA monies that are coming from and will be appropriated through other warrant articles. But, the town of Sunderland could responsibly spend, north of $1 million fixing stuff, replacing stuff, buildings, rolling equipment, underground infrastructure, et cetera. That's just not money that we have at this point. So, any discussion with respect to the capital piece? Discussion with respect to the operating budget piece. The current gap is 26 and change, 26,200.
Pretty clear.
Okay. Bob, what do you think with respect to the information in front? We know what we're gonna present. We're not gonna present $1 million because we don't have it. Although that's what we're being asked for. Okay, let's move on to the motions then. We left, I think, 5 motions last week.
Okay, these are not on the screen.
Yeah, Bob.
I was moving forward with this over $1 million
Essentially capital demand. Yep,
needed.
yep, requests, yep.
They're not going away, what's the plan so that we're going to fund these down the road?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great question. If the capital stabilization article passes, then up to $100,000 a year, or starting at $100,000 a year, is targeted directly for capital stabilization, straight up. As I'm sure this board has in the past, and hopefully this or future boards will in the future, they'll approach that judiciously. And some of these, if you look at this list of things, use the fire truck, for example. We're just about to enter into some discussions about shared fire services with other towns. So creativity isn't necessarily removed just because of a funding source. And again, a judicious approach toward capital requests isn't removed. The responsibility to be judicious about it isn't removed for future years. Hopefully, there'll be two lines intersecting in a graph at some point where the capital requirements will start dropping off and the funding source will meet a decade from now. But the real key is having an honest, programmatic, steady funding source. And until we do that, this $1.2 million will be a variation on that number for years to come.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you know, we're not, I would say on a purely, from this board member's perspective, borrowing isn't always a bad thing, but we have some things we can borrow for and other things we simply cannot. But it's a good question. We have actually spent a decade getting our debt service so it's below we first borrowed for the reconstruction of the school, 21% of our operating capacity was tied up in debt. We spent a decade getting it down to under double digits. Okay, so motions.
But you have to ask yourself, what's wise? If you're borrowing money at less than 1%,
Right, oh, yeah.
that's a good way to do it. Plus, when you look at $1 million, you have to look at what the $1 million actually says. $400,000 plus is a fire truck. Do we pay a fire truck immediately? Probably not.
Right.
If you have capital stabilization, it's funded properly, then that's something that you would bond, and you would pay it off over 10 years, or 5 years, or pick a number. But it would come out of that capital line item.
Right.
It'd be one item that's paid. So sometimes the problem with when you look at it, you see this over $1 million of capital cost. To me, that's not an unusual, that's not a scary number. It's just a fact of doing business. What may change? Maybe we're gonna find a different way to fund the fire department. Maybe we're gonna work with the surrounding communities. Maybe it's gonna be more of a regional, and versus a, singular as it is now. I don't know. I mean, if you told me 10 years ago that we'd have a regional ambulance, I would have told you that no way in the world that would happen. But, things are changing.
And Bob, maybe the perspective to take forward is if that capital stabilization funding source passes, it's much more targeted toward that top block of 308 than the things you actually can borrow for, or use CPA for, or find grant rounding for those recurring things with life cycles greater than 3 years, values of over $5,000, those things that we know are in the ground or over our heads. But Tom, you raise a great point. Borrowing is a tool that's borrowing is a tool that's an important tool.
That can be paid from a capital stabilization fund that's
Right.
It's
funded
targeted for that.
programmatically, right?
Yep. Great points.
It all comes back to the programmatic funding, no matter
That's
how you slice it up. It's, you can't avoid that.
We have
Well, you
programmatic.
can, but this is what happens. You have a huge list of things that you keep pushing off and pushing off.
We've got a programmatic expense problem.
Yes,
We know what that is.
exactly.
Every year.
Yep.
Every single year.
There it is again.
Every year. It's always back. Okay, the first article that we have to, motion that we have to act on is gonna be the Article 2, and that is going to be, elected officials' wages.
Now, this article does not require a select board recommendation, however, it is tied to the budget.
Correct.
Okay.
That's a really good point. These are elected officials' wages, and being elected officials, that's a slightly different animal than, staff. So, these numbers, I think the cost of living, the recommended COLA for the personnel committee is built into the town clerk and is built into the assessors, as they were the only two elected officials that asked. Okay, so, the next money article that we're associated with is Article 4. And this is the beginning of the use of free cash. Oh, I'm sorry, we did that one. This is the free cash number 62233, and that is for snow and ice, materials, and then, sorry, wages, and then 558183, sum total of 11,675.26. Again, funding source is what we're talking about, and it's set up as free cash.
Right, and on the use of cash sheet, which you have in your agenda packets, and it's up on the screen too, I do have that number showing in there, and that is the number as of April 14th. Oh, I'm sorry, April 16th, because there was a little bit of snow and ice and sleet between the
Came
15th and
around,
16th.
I'd like to take that opportunity to not just thank the folks at the highway department and the part-time seasonal help who come in and help out, but over the last 3 years in particular, we've done our level best to incrementally increase the snow and ice materials especially, so that they're a little more realistic in keeping with costs of those raw materials delivered. There were budget cycles where our appropriation covered the initial delivery and done. Everything else was snow and ice deficit spending. So again, the last 3 in particular budget cycles, the Finance Committee, this office, and the Highway Department have worked to continue to be realistic about those material charges.
I think it makes sense in light of the salt shortages and everything that we had this year, because it would have cost us far more if we hadn't done that,
That's a really good point.
if we
Dave.
could even get it.
And we had a traditional New England winter this winter.
That's right.
It really was.
So, free cash was the issue there. Is there any discussion about the use of free cash for that application? I mean, it's paying a bill in real time.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. The next for us was Article 6. Oh, I'm sorry, we did that. Article 7. This is the modified, this is the move the town vote to transfer. In this case here, there's been some movement as well. This is the 3 teacher retirement at the Sunderland Elementary School. Sticker price tag of $83,000+. The school committee and administration worked to take $10,000 out of the current year's budget. I think energy costs, not
I think
mistaken,
it
Yes.
was energy savings funds, yep.
to help pay for that piece. And they're asking for this $73,000 to pay the contract obligations for the retirement. A discussion about either the value or the use or the source?
I would hope, in my opinion, I don't know of any other town in the 4 towns that the retirement's on
On the warrant.
I understand it's a big amount, but I think this, I understand how it got to us. I won't support it after this year. That to me is it's a function, I think that's a function of the school budget.
We've had the discussion about payroll cost and then indirect costs.
Right.
So this is an indirect contract cost. It's built up over your time in service.
And I know how, and don't get me wrong, I know how it got here this year. I understand how it got here. It was a scary number. And I understand how it got here. I just don't think, you look around, it's not in any other budget. It has never been in our budget before like this. I don't ever remember being in a warrant article. I think we have to find a better way, and we'll work with our school committee next year to find a better way to fund this, but I would not support this after this year.
Having something to come back in this method.
Right.
Right.
Well, just kind of addressing the long-range funding, I was telling the chair today that I actually found a local option statute that would allow the town to start saving long-term outside of OPEB. So that could be a possibility, when you start discussing long-term, but.
I also know that there have been districts around us that have solved this problem in a more creative way instead of just throwing money at it. And I would think that we should look at that also. There's ways there's things that you can bring forward in contract negotiations that have the same end result, but it doesn't put an onus
Right, which
on
manage it better.
any particular year. It's factored into it. And we can do that And the people that are that benefit from this will benefit from the other plan, but it's not putting an onerous, thing on at any town next year, the year after, or 10 years down the road. And I think we really should look at that.
So we have homework to do in the current year and moving forward.
Correct.
Yes, we'll take care of this easily enough, but then there's a lot of work behind that.
And again, I understand how it got here,
Right.
I understand taking care of this year, but, and it's a bill that we have to pay, we don't have a choice in it.
Right. And in a way, we can appreciate them not wanting to stick it onto the budget, in that sense, and
Absolutely.
increasing it, you know,
Absolutely.
by that amount overall, so.
Raises a great point. Or,
It was,
as has been said, the responsibility of actually the tough work of budgeting. Budgeting can be difficult in general, but when there is the perception that a bill simply needs to be paid, that removes some of the pressures of budgeting, right? True budgeting.
It's, a budget is expensive versus revenue.
Revenues, pretty
Mhm.
easy.
And if you only look at one side of the equation, then you're not really budgeting.
Well, we have a revenue-based budget.
Yep.
And that's,
I've heard
and that's
that- I've
all
heard
we
that
have, is a
somewhere.
revenue-based budget.
So this case here, there was a hold on it. Is there a recommendation on this motion, again, with the funding source and the value?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
There's a motion made and seconded, a recommendation on Article 7. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 3-0, please. We have homework, though. Okay. The next hold for us was the budget. Now, we talked about the sequence of these articles in this order. I think it's important that we talk very, very topically about the history and the need for Article 9. And Article 9 was a special town meeting October,
Right.
and that was funding SCEMS. As the rollout of SCEMS has proceeded, the opportunity to take this vote and revisit the October 18th special town meeting vote gets $54,000 that was not an expense realized by the SCEMS rollout, and gets it back into our ambulance reserve, allowing that ambulance reserve appropriation to be, revenues to be appropriated for Article 10. That's important to bear in mind. All this did was essentially say, listen, the startup time was delayed, the values are equaling the current requests of the SCEMS, but we could certainly use that $54,000 in our revenue stream. And the only reason it's in ambulance reserve is, well, A, it's an actual grouping, that's where it came from, but B, that's not a revenue that we can anticipate for next year, just like we have done for ambulance reserves since its inception. Okay? So Article 9 is inherently attached to the funding to the tune of $54,152 to fund the budget under the ambulance reserve sum of $80,581. Okay? So Margaret, you wanna, if we're gonna raise and appropriate $6,382,182?
That's right, and that is the total, that is the net of the items at the top of the projected revenue sheet, the tax levy, cherry sheet numbers, and local receipts. And then deducting the state assessments, cherry sheet offsets, other amounts to be raised, and allowance for abatements. And that is the number, $6,382,182 would be the raise and appropriate figure. The next is the ambulance reserve of $80,581. The next item is the use of Comcast PEG access funds, totaling $14,194. And that's to fund the local telecommunications operations. And then there's an appropriation from the sewer fund for $344,611, and that's to fund the wastewater treatment plant operating budget and the sewer principal and interest.
That's the relining project.
The relining project, right. And then the next is the use of Title V funds to fund the Title V debt. And then The use of under-expended debt service reserve totaling $1,293. That's a one-time revenue source that needs to be, that would have to be applied to excluded debt. And then finally, the number that's plugged in, the motion right now is, it exceeds the free cash guidelines. The number is $145,505 to close that gap, for the sum total, and this is the budget total, of $6,973,521. And that free cash sum is $26,249 over the free cash, the town's free cash guidelines. Now, on this sheet, it still shows the $119,256, which is the 30%, but that'll be changed if the board approves additional use of free cash.
So we've gone through the reduction on the expense side. Some of it a little closer than we have in years past for things like benefits and insurance. With those benefits and insurance numbers, always had an anticipation of bringing somebody on board or somebody switching plans. We've worked in with the treasurer collector. She said, many towns keep it a little closer than Sunderland has. So that $10,000 is kind of a big nut, and frankly, a certain measure of risk.
There is risk.
Most of the budget in and of itself is a measure of risk. Every time we turn the lights on, there's some risk. However, that said, it just is.
True.
That said, I'd like to entertain the discussion about the use of free cash to the tune of the additional $26,249. Do we want to go after continued reductions in expenses, or do we want to fund it this time out of free cash?
Well, Mr. Chair, if I could.
Sure.
I think if you gotta go back and look at our budgets over the year, okay? And you're starting at, from FY '09, that was 6 years ago, okay? Since FY '09, Selectmen's budget is, Mr. Moderator, do you think it's greater than or equal to or less than the amount that we funded in 2009? It's less. He's got a common perception.
Right. That's a good point.
It's actually down 2.1% from that. So over that 6 years, we're still levels less than where we were in 2009. Accountant, we're up 1.8%. So if you're on Social Security, Medicare, whatever, over the last, since 2009, your probably increases that you've taken is greater than 1.8%,
Yeah.
okay?
Did I understand you correctly to say that?
In 2009, the Selectmen's budget was $148,646.
Oh, I'm looking at the total budget.
Today, our budget is 145,422. So that's 2.1% less. How about the assessor's office? In that time, the assessors has gone from, in 2009, of $52,351 to a grand total now of $43,498, down 16.9%. Tax collector treasurer is actually up 11.8%, went from $70,327 to $78,649. Okay, town clerk's office, over those 6 years, the town clerk's office is down. Originally it was $47,232. It's down, it's still less than at $44,761, so it's actually down 5.2%. Probably numbers you didn't think that were out there, did you? Okay. Town committees and boards, $19,832 in 2009. Now it's $17,495, decrease of 11.7%. Town buildings, $159,239 in
Good one. Yeah.
2000 now. We're now at $128,601, down 19.2%. Police department, think is up or down? This is an easy question. Up or down? Down, 3 point,
It's down, that must be down.
down 3.3%. Guy on the street probably thinks our police department's increased 100,000%. It's down 3.3%. 367, 669. Today's 355, 256. Fire department is up a lot, 158%, because we got a full-time ambulance. I don't know if that's a fair
It's n-
comparison,
Yeah, that's kind of,
but that's up 158%. Town inspectors are down 31%. Other protection was civil defense, radio system, animal control, crossing, street lights, we don't have a crossing guard, we still have $1 in that thing.
Just in case.
But we're down those are down 17%. Highway department, fashion a guess, hey, say down, you'd be right. 3.7% was 259,741 in 2009. Today it's 250,056, down 3.7%. Wait, we're not done yet.
I'm sensing a theme here.
I wanna go through, because I don't think a lot of people realize that. I think, you're picking on Bob because he's sitting here, but Bob's an average guy. Actually, he's not an average guy. Bob actually pays attention. He comes to meeting, and he would've thought, these numbers, we'd be above that. 6 years, how can you be spending less money than you were 6 years ago? You have to spend more.
Nope.
The library's up 4.3%. They were at 114,421. Their budget is 119,447.
Tom,
They're
health
up.
and sanitation?
Huh?
Health and sanitation?
Oh, yeah, we missed that one.
I didn't even look at that.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
I-
That's way down because of the elimination of curbside.
That's-
That's down many percent.
Right, that's.
Yeah.
All right,
Take it out as noise.
schools. Sunderland Elementary School. Do you have an idea where Sunderland Elementary School is?
Must have gone up.
Well, you're still, if you were taking a true-false test in Professor Doobie's class, you'd be batting a 0 right now. Sunderland Elementary, and I don't know how they done it. I really don't. In 2009, their budget was $2,169,938. This year, they're asking for $2,039,780. $2,039,780. So over the course of those 6 years, their budget has gone down. We're still at 5.9% less than what they were in 2009. I don't know how they're doing it,
Then
but we beat them up, because I'm getting to my point. I'm not quite there yet. You may be able to know where I'm going.
Yeah,
Franklin County Tech.
got a point.
Franklin County Tech is, in 2009 was 129,916. Today they're 136,045 for a growth of 4.7%. That's purely assessment, number of students,
Enrollment.
That goes
up and down.
a lot,
We-
yeah.
It's very difficult, Frontier Regional. And any guess, is that
Up and down.
up or down?
that had to go up.
Yeah.
You can never be always wrong. You're absolutely correct. Frontier Regional in 2009 was $1,401,556. Today, they're asking for a budget of $1,780,651 for a net increase percentage of that time of 27%. The increase of $379,095 in those 6 years
To the town of Sunderland.
to the town of Sunderland. That's just town of Sunderland.
That's just our,
So,
Then, since 2009, I don't believe there's been a year where we haven't put in the 2.5% automatically.
on,
yeah, you're talking
Oh,
about
new growth.
Right.
New growth.
Oh,
Which
it's-
totals, which actually this year totals, totals about $109,000. And the increase in, I'm sorry, I hate to point this out, the increase in Frontier's assessment alone is $152,000. So that increase alone, that budget increase alone increases the town's new growth by,
Takes it right.
yeah, $45,000.
It ate the 2.5% and more.
Exceeds our growth.
Right.
The one request exceeds our growth. To Tom's punchline, you get down to total operating, general government, total operating budget, not general government, 5% since 2009. And you can see where
It's
the
increased
total, yeah,
Right.
5% over
Yeah,
that period
over
of
that
time.
period. All those minuses are offset by a couple of humdingers.
I just think there's very interesting numbers. When you look at the budget like we do, we have very interesting, very interesting. I don't know how we've been able, to put these budgets together. I do know that we have had tremendous, things that bother me in the budget is that we've had tremendous help, understanding, working with the elementary school.
Yes,
They go, I don't know, and at the same time, and they understand that, and we know, for those that don't, that if you decrease and start making cuts, you're gonna lose kids to school choice, and you will lose you'll lose students, and you, from our town going to other town, which costs us money, plus you don't get students in. They walk that tightrope every single budget cycle, and they've done a good job the last 6 years. There's some others, through the police, our contract negotiations,
That's a great point.
highway department is still working, people, they see the highway, they don't understand, the highway department's working on a 38-hour schedule.
that's right,
There is no overtime. I mean, the only time they get us
yeah.
is,
Snow and ice or
Basically,
emergency.
an emergency work in the other
right.
season.
and a lot of times they'll take the next day off.
Yeah.
So, and when you look at what we pay some of our people, and you can say what you wanna say, but we have some very dedicated people that work for the town of Sunderland, and they're willing to put their monetary, they like doing their job, that's all I can say, because they're doing it with very small incremental increases.
Fascinating.
And you just have,
Could you play the devil's advocate and say, okay, the town has been decreasing its operating budget, but at the same time, its capital requirements have been going up, and we are not funding those. So, at some point in time, they're just gonna come back and bite us in the butt.
Absolutely.
In
And that's
some
what-
areas, right?
For 14 years, there's been a pretty unified voice coming from the leadership of the town that you have to have capital, you have to have a capital planning, and you have to have a means of funding it. The finance committee, a couple years ago, when Nancy Maglione was the chair, sat down and worked with Margaret and came up with a policy for using free cash and putting money into stabilization. It's a nice,
Concept.
it was able to codify how money goes and where it goes. But the bottom line is if you know anything about budgeting, free cash is, you don't know. Look at, we had this year, what, $70,000 plus for the teacher's retirement that basically was,
Wiped it out.
right, a side, what, 30%?
Yeah.
Probably a 30% of our funds. Well, actually, yeah, about 30,
Yeah.
about 30%. We had 300,000 something, and basically.
Yeah, the warrant articles alone, including the teacher retirement, represents about 30%, close to it.
And kinda to your point, Bob, if you even put the capital aside, it's gonna come back and bite us in the butt, just in the stuff that we're cutting that we're not doing, just like regular building maintenance and things like that we've cut. Let alone, the big capital things, it's the day-to-day stuff that, well, we can't do that, we're gonna have to let it go, and then, that'll cause, some other problem down the road, so.
There are a couple of specific capital line items inside of the capital budget that whatever action we're gonna take. Catch basin rebuilding, a multi-year plan, it's only $20,000, used to be in the roads maintenance line. You have $6,000 to replace broken equipment at the library, that normally would be in the buildings line. Now that's capitalized, and frankly, it's deferred regardless. So, anyway, to answer your question, yes. Yes.
And Bob realizes, I was just using him because I do think he pays attention. But even someone that pays attention, they don't look at the numbers that we look at. And I think he's a good example Cause he's an outside person that that's in the town office quite a bit. And basically, unless you look at, those are the numbers.
Right.
Those numbers
Just the numbers,
are
exactly right.
fact.
Right. That's,
And even someone like that has a very close relationship with the town as the moderator, he doesn't look at some of those numbers because that's not what people do.
Before waste treatment, Bob, and debt, 5% over, which is essentially 7 budget cycles. And largely, if that was a pie chart, you'd see the pie growing in certain areas, and shrinking in other areas. It can be a stunning graphic.
and actually, you know, it's less than the rate of inflation, because it'd been at least, you know, it's somewhere between 1% and 2.5% each year.
Yeah.
And you tack that
So-
on.
Right, even if you say it's 1% a year, you're still coming up behind the 8 ball.
Right.
You're saying that's what inflation has been?
I could look it up, but I know it's been over 1% every year. You know, it varies, it goes up and down,
So
but you
it's
know,
basically moving with inflation or a little bit less.
but we're behind it, yeah.
Some are moving, yeah.
Way ahead.
Overall, the budget
We're
is,
moving
but
way
yeah,
ahead.
some budget segments are moving more quickly than inflation, others are
Right.
lagging behind.
Right,
It's like flying a plane. There's the prop and there's the wake.
yeah.
We budget in the wake and we try to keep up with the prop. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in front of us, and I think that this is this kind of information exchange has gotta continue, and to us, it's almost, well, it can sound like it's ad nauseum, but the reality is they're just the numbers. And the numbers have to fight the perception, and the perception's very, very different.
Yeah.
The discussion point about the additional use of free cash to fund the budget, I guess, I just wanna make sure that there's consensus on that. It's this warrant article, as this motion is shaped, we are gonna ask for the use of an extra nearly $27,000 of free cash to fund this gap. Now, we've been 3 full years, this is probably the 4th, using that set of guidelines. This will be the first time we've made an exception on that.
Under duress.
Under duress.
Yeah.
With homework, with
great-
homework to do.
yes.
Because there's pressure on that free cash from warrant articles. To Tom's point earlier about the teacher's retirement, you know, it won't happen like that again. That'll take some of that pressure off that free cash, that
Right.
one funding source. So any more discussion? If not, is there a motion to recommend Article 10?
Yeah, motion.
Second for, final say, and my thing is that I hope if you look at Frontier's budget this year, and I'm gonna use them as an example, they typically applied $140,000 from their excess and deficiency over the last few years to help offset the cost of education. This year, that went away. What does that mean? The same, it put a big, huge, a larger burden on to the town to support their budget. In a microcosm in our town, by increasing our use of free cash to this level, it's gonna make it that much harder to sustain it going forward. Personally, I don't think 150,000 is an exceptional amount of money
Historically, yeah.
historically. But at the same time, it is because we're not using money this year to pay or look at our capital expenditures. So my opinion is if we don't really have a choice this year, next year's gonna be very difficult. If anybody's out there, school committees, Frontier, Sunderland, various library, highway, police, whatever, I'm letting you know now, there will be a budget crunch come again next year. If you need any additional things, we're gonna follow up with a letter after town meeting that will be sent to every member of school committees and boards and things that you better start thinking about next year because the revenue won't be there.
And can I just quickly add to that? One of the big reasons is the local budget reductions. Okay, so we've gone through 2 cycles of budget reductions since the budget cycle started this year. A big part of free cash is unexpected appropriated amounts from the operating budget. And when you reduce these budget lines and you have to use all of that money, it doesn't show up in free cash.
Next year.
It's right. So free cash, I feel that free cash is gonna look very different next year. It's difficult to know right now, it's early, but, that's,
It's not.
well,
The thing
If
is,
you don't have surprises.
Margaret, right now, Margaret, you're being too nice. Right now.
maybe
you-
I am.
Right now, you can predict you can predict right now, unless everybody in this room and everybody that watches this program for the next 3 or 4 months goes out and buys a new car,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
Our
that ain't
local
happening.
receipts are gonna be about the same. You're not,
Right.
they're gonna be about the same for the state, they're gonna be about the same for, I mean, we have tremendous historical data here. What are we doing? A lot of those places, there may be, like, you're saving money by taking money out of, the insurance.
Sure.
Guess what? That's typical free cash.
that goes to free cash if there's excess, yes.
But that's prudent budgeting.
Yes, it is.
But we can't do that this year.
No.
So you can, Margaret, right now, you can predict right now,
You can predict, because I suppose,
probably within $3,000 what our free cash is gonna be next year.
just take everything that you've reduced.
180.
Right.
180 instead of 390.
And I bet you if you put that on the blackboard back there right now, and fast forward it a year,
We make chop.
guess
Yeah,
what?
yeah.
Scott is right.
Yeah, it's true, it's true. I
Not
mean,
that
the
hard.
only, in the past, we've been fortunate, we've had, big reimbursements for, say, storm damage or something like that. You can't predict that, you can't expect that.
Well, and we talk
So-
about numbers. There's one number we actually haven't discussed tonight. We've discussed it in the past amongst ourselves and things, and this ties into, you're trying to make people aware of these numbers. One of my personal goals this year is to come up with some very good, concise reporting on numbers like this that we can utilize. And one of the numbers that we don't see in here is the amount of money that we used to get from the state for things like Chapter 70 and stuff, which has gone down dramatically. And that's one of the things I really want to get down and chart up in some nice, easy to look at numbers. Because that is an input to this whole process that has gone down. So consequently, the local, the towns are left with, well, you're getting less money coming in. You've got 2 choices, either cut or raise the taxes on the individuals. And that number 2 is a very, very important number that is, somehow slips under the radar
Well, they
and
get
doesn't get discussed
they
as
get a
much.
pass.
They do, and, they might get a pass, but the ball's getting thrown somewhere, and it's getting thrown at us.
Yeah, and we pay by the gallon at the gas pump, or
Yep.
the percentage at the meals, or where it is, in the New England congressional delegation, we complained, or is complaining that, we don't get our dollar of service at the federal level. It's pretty easy. I bet you get a whole bunch of cities and towns that could say this very same thing at the state level,
Right.
Commonwealth level. Any further discussion on the article, that's the motion for Article 10?
Mhm.
All those in favor?
Aye.
2-0, please. We had, the next one is, with that allocation of free cash, it allows about $40,000, not quite 40,000, basically $40,000 that can be moved into capital stabilization.
And still leave the minimum $100,000 to revert to free cash in the coming year.
And it begs the question, do we allow a larger percentage to revert, knowing that we used it to help offset the operating budget? Or do we put it in capital stabilization, only in that we know it's there? Again, after the first of the year, after the 1st of July, there's no such thing as free cash anymore.
Gone.
It's gone.
If you put it in
I wouldn't put
stabilization,
in
it's,
capital, so I would put in stabilization,
right,
not capital.
because then at least it's there, and
You're gonna put it anywhere.
Warrant.
There's, the warrant clearly says capital stabilization, not stabilization, on Article 12.
And so if it's in Article 12 and it's capital stabilization, the challenge with capital stabilization is getting it out for other areas. Capital stabilization is specific to
Capital.
capital.
Now, the town's current,
What's the balance in?
We're just heading there.
stabilization?
current stabilization balance is $265,347.
I think you can put money in stabilization at any time you want.
We haven't,
If you,
It's part of the process.
the warrant itself article is phrased for capital.
Capital.
You're warning the inhabitants that you're gonna put money into a stabilization
Into a s-
account.
into a stabilization account.
Okay, so can we,
Is it more restrictive or less restrictive? Can you use
Probably-
stabilization for
You're right, it is
capital
less
expenses?
restrictive
Less
putting it into
restrictive.
stabilization.
Do you need a 2/3 vote to get it in? Yes. Do you need a 2/3 vote to get it out? So how is it less or more restrictive? Right?
Either way, you're committing that free cash so that it can be used in some,
way in the future.
one way is very specific, one way is,
One way is restrictive and one way isn't.
well, I think they're both restrictive as far as the town's historical use of stabilization, but one is more restrictive, right?
Right, from a procedural standpoint.
Yeah.
Tom, I appreciate the sentiment. One balance is $19,000, one balance is $250,000. We're talking about $40,000. You might get, if it makes it to capital stabilization, you'd get to not quite $60,000.
The town of Sunderland hasn't voted to support capital stabilization, Scott. How many times have we had a capital stabilization 2.5 override on, and it has failed? 4
Yeah.
times. It hasn't shown that it supports a capital stabilization.
Okay, so the mechanism to move it, if we have a warrant that says capital stabilization,
I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, you can put,
I'm asking how,
that's my opinion.
Can we make a
Understand.
motion on the floor to,
if you're gonna take a warrant article that's phrased for capital stabilization, how do we make the move to get it in stabilization? That's all I'm asking.
Bob, what will you allow?
You just have to amend it, that's all.
Easy.
You're moving from a more restrictive
Actually-
to a less restrictive, so.
You could actually do both under the same, you could move money to capital stabilization and to stabilization, couldn't you? I mean, could you take 2 actions under the same article? I mean, it requires a 2/3 vote no matter what.
Yeah, but
All right,
Total-
maybe I'm
I
complicating
I guess,
things,
Scott,
but
why are you gonna move the money to capital stabilization? Do you have a plan on paying for any capitals?
maybe urgent capital needs.
Were we planning on doing something like that?
Not in this particular budget cycle. Again, if it's a prerogative of the board to move it to stabilization, we developed that free cash use for, a whole host of reasons. One of them is choosing a stabilization fund. We have certainly the capacities to make that choice.
And what does the recommendation say the money should go? It addresses stabilization also, doesn't
It
it?
does, yep. A
It's
percentage.
capital and,
Have that right
Capital
here.
it's
and-
capital and,
Yep.
so why would you pick one over the other?
The
I
guidelines,
guess I asked the same question of you. Why would you pick one over the other?
Because stabilization gives us additional, if something happens where we need money to come out for, we have to hire a second teacher or an aide or heaven, it gives us
Something
that
that-
option. Or if we get a student that goes to Smith
Oh,
Vocational
sure.
or whatever.
25 grand or whatever.
Or if you have a special ed student that needs transportation, you can't take it out of capital stabilization. You can take it out of stabilization.
I guess
guy-
having had a chance to think about it, Tom, my answer would be the disparity between the two sums.
Yeah.
That's just math to me. One has $19,000 in a town that's $370 million of value.
Yep.
We have infrastructure that's in the tens of millions of dollars. and we have $19,000 in that account. That's why I would support moving it to capital stabilization.
Yeah, you can I disagree.
Right.
It's okay.
And I understand the point you're making.
Until the town supports a capital stabilization, I have a hard time moving money into it.
There are capital projects that need to be done regardless.
Well, you can do
And
that
they-
with stabilization too.
And they can be taken out of stabilization. We worked many
We
years.
can
We
That's true
established,
before it was.
we established a capital stabilization and thinking that the town would support a capital plan, that they would like to know, they'd want a plan, a programmatic plan for maintaining and fixing and obtaining their capital improvements in town.
So the free cash guidelines say, with regard to stabilization, once the DOR recommended 5% cash reserves threshold is met, and right now the town has 6.7%, up to 10% free cash to stabilization annually.
Okay,
Easy, done.
alright. So that's.
Can
what
be,
keeps
I
it
mean,
within
and
the
it's
guidelines.
the town's
$40,000,
prerogative.
Just a little north of 10.
Yeah.
So we can amend that on the floor, change the motion? Fine.
You still gotta vote.
Well, I understand.
31.
It's still a vote. I totally get it. But we're voting and recommending Article 12 as it's written, a value is first order of business. Is it 40,000, nice round, easy number?
Yeah.
That leaves us
That's-
106,000-ish moving into free cash, or moving forward.
Sounds good.
40,000 still all right?
And 10% would be what, 39,752.
So 40.
So how close
Oh,
is
'cause we're
that?
going
About
over.
How
40.
close is
40
that?
guys.
How much is that gonna leave you in free cash?
How much does that leave you? Well, we'll find out.
106?
It leaves, 106.
Okay,
Oh, so that would go to stabilization, not capital stabilization. And there's your balance down there, 106,574.
Mhm.
That's about what would normally be turned over to the following year's free cash.
So the discussion about the value, I guess, is important. Right? If we're gonna stay inside the framework for, moving free cash forward, it's still the 106. That's easy.
Can you take money out of capital stabilization and turn it into free cash?
No.
That would be your prime example why you would have put the money in stabilization.
Mhm.
In case it's needed for other extraordinary.
Correct.
Yeah,
As opposed to earmarking it for specific.
Yeah, I understand the inputs and the outputs.
Right.
I have no issue
But
with
it's
it
a
at all.
philosophical issue in that,
Pick one.
And I'm just saying that if we have a hard time next year,
Yeah.
and if you don't have the revenue, if you don't have the free cash or whatever, you can't go to capital stabilization to help you with the
That's
budget.
That's right. Absolutely
Except through
right.
several town meeting votes.
Correct.
So the value is the first thing to decide. Is the 40,000 still what we're comfortable with, moving from free cash to
Yes.
stabilization?
I'm comfortable with
To
that.
me, it is.
Okay, so the value is pretty good. So the motion in front of us right now reads, move that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $40,000. It currently reads capital stabilization fund. Now, our strategy, if that's associated, right, is to take a vote on this, or take a vote on this. We can't change the warrant article.
Right, we're to vote as it is, put the sum in there, vote it, and then amend it on the floor.
I believe that's
Friday,
correct.
right?
Can't change the warrant article. Can we change the motion?
Now, the warrant article reads a sum or sums of money to the capital stabilization fund. Now, changing the motion, Bob, how would you propose that that be done?
On the floor, or do you want to vote for it now? We'd have conflicting vote, right? You'd have a vote to recommend on the warrant, and then language, it could be different on the motion. Do you want to,
But your warrant, when's the warrant's already posted?
Yes, it is.
You're not gonna
Right.
change that,
Right, we can't, yeah.
so you're gonna have to amend it.
Do it on the
town
floor.
meeting
Okay. That's a piece of
Probably less
agility.
confusing,
Yeah, I
maybe?
agree.
Yeah.
Well, it also frankly, anyway.
Right.
We could,
I know.
okay, so, discussion around 12? We're either gonna vote this motion down and then amend, or you're gonna support this motion so that the money gets moved, you send the message to town meeting, the money gets moved, but we wanna change where it's being moved to.
Right.
You have those two options.
Yeah.
So you either vote this and say, yes, we still wanna support a move, however, we changed our mind.
Right.
Or B, or a discussion, we came with an alternate path, or B, we're actually not recommending that. We're recommending something else. Which message do we wanna send? And that's right now in the form of a question as we take this vote.
And you can't, I mean, you'd have to have the number in there
Yeah, you
for
need
the original motion, correct? Okay,
You need a value. We
Yeah.
agree on, I think I hear there's an
So-
agreement on value.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
It's just a matter of how we wanna,
How we wanna go about it. So if we vote this, we gotta go to town meeting and say, listen, anybody who saw our meeting, you recognize that we had a warrant that was developed, et cetera. We think it should be somewhere else, and here's why.
I think that's
Support
the
us on
best
that.
way.
Okay.
okay, so the motion, then the motion would be
so we're voting no on this.
$40,000 to fund the capital stabilization fund, but then there's going to be an amendment.
Amendment on the
Okay.
floor. So
Okay,
you
so
send a
we have to
message
vote
with,
in
you send a
favor.
message with a vote that you still wanna set the money aside.
Right.
Right.
And then we move it, we change it on the floor.
To stabilization, okay.
Okay. Any discussion about the mechanism, the value I think we're good with? Any discussion about the mechanism? If not, is there a motion to is there a recommendation on the motion for Article 12?
Motion.
I'll second. So, we have a motion made and seconded, this is a value of $40,000, it's to move to capital stabilization. The discussion is that we intend to amend this on the town meeting floor
Yes,
to move to stabilization.
I would recommend that, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion made and seconded to recommend this, and we know our follow-up.
That's right.
Right,
And you will
okay.
have that motion in your town meeting binders, so you'll be ready for the motion. Mhm.
Okay,
All right.
the motion's made and seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, 3-0, please.
Oh, we should need to
No.
vote no.
No, we just,
0-3 on the motion. 0-3 on the original motion.
why am I flummoxed on this?
Yeah, I'm confused.
The original
now.
motion is capital
I
stabilization.
understand, and we're gonna amend it on town meeting floor.
Right.
They're
Your motion's gonna be on the motion sheet, though, right? We can include the wording of the amendment on the motion sheet as well, underneath that article,
Of course.
but,
It's gonna be written anyways, it'll be already written for the town clerk.
Yeah, but since the warrant's already posted, the only thing that you can present to the town initially is,
Right.
This
And-
motion,
Yeah.
And we can put our amendment right underneath it.
yeah,
it's important to bear in mind, there's almost a split function. We established the value.
but it'll be 2 votes.
I know.
maybe I missed something, but if your recommendation was on the amendment,
Uh-huh.
then there will be no recommendation under the main motion in Article 12. There'll only be a recommendation on the amendment. How's that? Is that the intent here? Yes, it 3-0.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, got it. Thank you.
We're getting to that who's on first point.
Well, no, it's a clear mechanism. You don't wanna
Yeah,
you don't wanna have it thrown out because the warrants are reviewed by the Attorney General
Right.
for a reason, you know? Last thing you wanna do is say, you did what?
Well, it's that I can just,
I hear
Okay.
ya.
it-
So
just
that
try not
amendment
to
will show
confuse words.
immediately under the main motion,
Right.
okay, on everybody's motion sheets.
Right. So we're gonna bring forward this vote, and we're gonna say, move to amend.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so next up, Tom, you still got your head in your hand.
No, I sometimes get very complicated to do simple things.
It does.
In front of us, what we have, Article 13, is the last 3 or 4 years, we've been voting a capital budget as opposed to warrant article, warrant article, warrant article. In this case here, as we have no capital funding for the projects of $327,772, the capital budget as as you see it right here, as it was up earlier, we'll simply have one line on it, and that'll be the sewer reserve project. Is it right there, Bob?
It's right there where the,
That one, yeah.
So the only thing you'll
This is
see
it.
on the capital budget that's gonna go forward is the handout. It's not gonna be this total.
You didn't wanna pick a couple things out of here, like the highway radio gear? $3,500?
I guess we certainly could. We're starting with a $19,000 balance in capital.
After some lower,
I guess as part of the capital budget right here, again, we have a funding source for sewer.
Yep.
That's pretty straightforward. That's an easy vote. You know, I guess if we're gonna go about picking a handful of items,
Well, we got 3 items that we could potentially spend money on, Scott. You got the gun racks, you got the radios, and you got the HVAC unit motors, compressors for our library.
I was saying in an earlier discussion that if there was one item on this, you would be saving money immediately on would be the HVAC.
HVAC, yep.
As soon as you plugged it in, you'd be saving money.
Right, that gets a return, whereas the others are just, well, I mean, but yeah, I would agree with that,
I mean, what do you think?
cover those 3.
I guess the question about radio equipment, I read the justifications, the police gun racks. Again, the only one, frankly, Tom, if I was to pick one at $20,000, I would pick the storm drain rebuilding.
I agree.
but it wouldn't be able to be funded at the requested level, right? Yeah.
Right, you wouldn't be able to fund $20,000, but you could say, listen, well, here's one thing that we are gonna fund.
Then do 15,000.
Fix 4,
Right. Instead of 5.
5.
It would be nice to kind of tag some priorities onto these items too. Cause I'm
Yeah.
looking at thinking of what a couple of other towns have done too, like the highway department generator, isn't that tied to pumping fuel during plowing times?
Yep.
I
Good.
would,
That could,
They are categorized in the capital plan based on the requests. They're labeled urgent, very high priority, or high priority.
Each area, yeah.
It doesn't show on this.
then, I agree, then do the storm drain and do 15,000 storm drain and do, the 35 for the radios.
out of capital stabilization.
Yeah.
Okay, so 3,500, right, radios. $15K storm. $18,500.
And
Right.
we end up with less like $1,000, and that's how much we originally put in that first year, 3 years ago.
18.5, and then, so the motion would read
There it is.
18.5. Capital equipment, buildings, facilities, other capital projects as shown.
Yeah.
Margaret, the funding source, right? Budget by funding source.
It's gonna be, yeah, the total
So-
is going to be 24,500.
Yep.
So the sum of 24,500 as shown in the capital budget, which is gonna show the highway department radio equipment and storm drain replacement for $15,000 plus the wastewater treatment plant bar rack assembly from sewer reserve, and that's it.
Okay,
Sound reasonable?
okay. The discussion? I mean, it'd be nice to be able to have funds for all of it, but we just don't have it. Storm drains are gonna continue to be, ongoing maintenance, and again, for years, we paid for that out of roads. We don't do that anymore. Any further discussion?
Unless
Uh-huh.
you wanna look at your 40,000 and break that, okay.
I'm of the mindset, Tom, that by not funding it, then we're just gonna have to do what we've gotta do.
Right.
That's the
Well,
way
I
it is.
agree with that.
It's an example of why we absolutely need to have people show up at the polls and be serious about funding their capital in their town. Not be serious about, or not be silly about other things.
It's a very specific funding mechanism, it's not money that just kind of goes to pay for $1,000 toilet
Again,
seats
anybody
or
that
whatever.
looks at this, we're not gonna put money toward the engineering costs for up to $2 million worth of grant rounds on North Main Street, because we're just not doing it. So we run in jeopardy of that project potentially withering on the vine, which is
Right.
storm drain, sewer, sidewalk, road resurfacing, all that, because we don't have
Entire
$50,000 to pay engineers, which is our part. You
Right.
know, it's such short-sighted money, such a short-sighted perspective. I
For a
find- I
$1.5
find it-
million project
I-
that would be funded.
Right.
I find
Federal highway.
elements of this part of the year of like wearing fiberglass underwear. It's not fun.
That's a good.
Pink
A good
fiberglass
I
or
Good
don't care what the
analogy.
color is. It's like, you know, if you're wearing fiberglass underwear, you know how irritating it is.
I think it's really important with capital
I appreciate the analogy.
funding, a capital stabilization override. The specific capital proposals still go before town meeting
Well,
for
that's
their
it.
approval.
That's still
They
the appropriate
require
amount.
town meeting
and
approval.
two-thirds.
Nothing gets approved without town meeting votes.
That's the thing,
I
is
don't
that
think
there's,
that's the problem.
right, that's a very.
I know, but I thought it would be important to mention.
I know,
Yep.
Margaret,
No,
but that's not,
Yeah, I know.
that's why people don't vote yes or no on something.
But it's worth mentioning from a
Absolutely.
philosophical
Well,
standpoint.
just to let voters, residents know they have a say.
Fiberglass?
Fiberglass underwear.
Scritch, scritch.
So, $24,500 in fiscal year 2015 for the capital equipment, buildings, facilities, other capital projects as shown in the document. And this document will be amended to show three lines: radio,
It'll be told, yeah.
basin, and then its funding source,
Mhm.
and then sewer reserve and $6,000 for the project, and
Mhm.
everything else will be gone.
Mhm.
I think that's important to bear in mind. So, you know, we have $1 million worth of potential. That'd be a heck of a motion on the floor, wouldn't it, Bob?
Let's put that on there.
Right? So we'll have 3 lines on the document and their appropriate source.
It's sort of a barometer on civic pride to a certain extent as well.
Sure.
I mean,
Pride and involvement.
right, and involvement.
I think at one of
And
our joint,
community.
at one of our joint meetings, there was question about the storm drain across from one of the members' homes. Gray water drains, right? Okay, so 24,500 from 3 projects and 2 funding sources. Is there any further discussion? If not, is there a recommendation?
Motion.
Motion, second.
I have a motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. And I believe,
There's a CPA article.
I was headed there.
Okay.
And there is a CPA article that's on hold that has to do with the future year's appropriations.
I received an email this morning from the chair of the CPC indicating the change in the numbers.
Oh, right, because we had to have that exact as part of the motion.
They were
Correct.
reviewing their numbers, and so I've plugged in his numbers, and he's okayed it, and this motion reflects the changed numbers.
Actual values. Okay, so again, what happens here is, you're actually essentially setting the values, anticipated values for the upcoming year. And town meeting has to do it, just like it appropriates out of CPA money, it's also got to anticipate those revenues going forward. So that's what this is.
It also has to, by law, we have to put away certain percentages for the 4 areas.
Categories, right.
So that over time, you have to say that you have appropriated at least 10% for something, the historical preservation, 10% for recreation, 10% for whatever. And I just know that the mechanism to do that is, like I said before, you go to that meeting and you watch all these volunteers and the citizen farmer, all these great people sitting there going over numbers
Piles of paper.
and I just sit back and it's like, this is what Paul Harvey was talking about.
That's right.
This is what America, you have these people. And I do know that Jennifer and Rock somehow they come up with these numbers, and I don't know how in the world they do it, but
It is
there's formulas and they go back and forth and they argue about $5, so.
we did that today with $53.
I do know that, like, we'll have to probably look at, I know one of the categories that we haven't really tackled is, housing.
Housing.
Yeah.
And that, on the CPC, they know that.
So this is
I'll be going to a regional something or other
Meeting,
Friday daytime before town meeting down at Holyoke Community College. It's gonna be a big regional forum on rural
Cool.
communities, affordable housing.
They know that. They,
yeah.
and they know they gotta work on that. We have to work on it.
And that's I think that's by nature a tougher one because of the expense of it and the tools that you have to work with, you know.
Yeah,
It's
there's,
more challenging.
there's a social component too,
Yeah,
very much a social component. People get wildly animated when you use the word affordable.
they do, as a matter of fact.
They just get wildly animated.
And again,
Their
look-
dark side shows.
Look across the river to the west of us,
Yeah.
underneath the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf.
A great point. So again, this is the apportionment of the revenues for the upcoming year for each of the designated areas. And now that we have the real values, is there a motion to recommend?
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion made and seconded, and I want to thank the CPC who does this work, not just yeoman's work. This is big strategic stuff in the end, when all's said and done. Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
3-0, please. Okay, so we have a warrant that's posted and ready. We have a little bit of strategy with respect to really one article. Total number of articles are 31, the last 6 being the consent articles. There are a couple of these articles that are associated with planning board. And one of them was a catalyst was a citizen's petition. I think that's gonna be a right and fine discussion. There's a dog bylaw that language happens to be inside, lining us up with the statute. There are some money articles here that are current year as well as the upcoming year. And our annual town meeting is at 7 PM this Friday.
6:30,
Sorry, 6:30 is the start for us,
right?
It's 6:30.
6:30.
Oh, sorry,
Town meeting starts at 6:30.
6:30. 6:30 this Friday at the elementary school.
Right.
I was thinking something else.
No, I mean, the last few years, we've started special at 6:30 and the annual at 7.
Right, we're just starting at the same time.
But now we're not, so we're starting
Pushing
at
it back.
6:30.
There'll be a couple of handouts at the front door specific to capital stabilization, overrides, and guesstimates on impacts.
I prepared something, it's in the board's binder
Yep.
tonight. And it's a handout just explaining what capital stabilization is, why capital stabilization override, what will the tax rate impacts be? And then, of course, there's the chart with tax rate impacts for the long-term debt payoff, the school's long-term debt payoff, and then also tax rate impacts for capital stabilization override. Based on those two items, there would be a net reduction in the tax rate of 4 cents.
And then that's an important thing, is that, and I'll say this very slowly and clearly, we can have a capital stabilization override and still reduce taxes. You can act responsibly and save money.
I think
It's a win. It's a win.
It's really important also to bear in mind, these are just estimates. The people who really do the tax work are the assessors and the Department of Revenue.
Yes.
So these are orders of magnitude based on today.
And based on two specific items.
Right.
Yes.
So you can't take this all to the bank, you know, you could have the town lose value next year,
That's right.
right? Or you could have the town gain value next year. We don't really ever, that's a,
It's always a moving target.
I agree, that's a fascinating process, but anyway.
It is.
The handouts will continue to vet, and again, I think to David's point, you know, we're retiring a big charge of debt, in an accelerated and a responsible manner. And, that said, you have the opportunity to fund some of your infrastructure, going forward, specifically to your infrastructure, and you still vote it every year. It's not like it's just
Right.
going into, you know, a secret account run by people with green visors. Okay.
What kind of underwear?
No. Those guys always smile. Those guys are always smiling. So those couple of handouts will be right out front at the beginning, at the table. All right, so again, this Friday at 6:30 at the elementary school. Anything I missed tonight? If there's not, is there anything?
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I'd just like to thank you for the open discussion that we had. Some towns, I mean, I think it's important that we can have divergent thoughts and still be able to talk about it in
Oh,
a civil
yeah.
manner.
That
If
is
you
a
want,
good
because
thing.
if you
Yep.
wanna see otherwise, you can go on YouTube and punch in a couple of our neighbors.
I have no interest in watching. There's always a,
Actually, I think you should. I think people should. I think I'm very proud to serve on this board. There's a level of civility and understanding and respect for one another that may not always be, we take it for granted.
yeah, I think you're right,
That's
actually.
good.
And most
And
of the towns around here are televising their meetings on YouTube now, so people can go and watch the other.
Our town included, so if you
Well, they
surf in YouTube.
They should watch
yeah,
our meetings then.
That's right. Well, it's a good
you know,
compare and contrast, you're right.
Let's draft the handouts.
Again, I just think it's important that we're able to have our conversations. I appreciate the conversation, so, thank you, Mr. Chair.
This sheet really, I'm waiting for the whole budget season. This is gonna be my summer project, is reporting, because, you know, you really look at this and we're not even keeping up with inflation. And, well, that's all I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna get up in the soapbox right now. I'll quickly get.
Friday night's a good time, Dave.
Yeah, actually,
Right.
Friday's a perfect time.
That's why I'm just,
Good points. Okay, Bob, anything we should go over with respect to town meeting? Anything jump out at you? Excellent.
oh, I have one question for you, Bob, actually.
Hour and a half.
What, that's what I was, how does the
On Article
article,
12?
is that the dog one?
Yeah, good, I'm making one up, but yeah.
How does this
So-
number compare historically with our article numbers in the past? I don't remember.
How's the number?
Yeah,
Well, we've had a lot more.
okay. So we're
Article?
average or so?
Oh, typically, we can do
Yeah.
40 plus.
Yeah, 31.
So we're not
We
too
had
bad then.
50 one time.
31?
I think there were a couple of process changes that
Yes,
we've. the
capital
board-
budget.
Capital budget is one, as opposed to article by article. We would have an article on $1,200 gun rack.
Right.
Yeah.
And its funding source.
I recall that.
So by doing it as a budget, the process was to condition town meeting and future boards to do, effective capital planning and vote a capital budget. As
Right, so
opposed
you're not
to
doing item,
one to
item,
one.
item.
And it can still be amended, it can still go through the list, but
Right.
it's a budget. So that would save a bunch.
Well, you can actually see the planning behind
And
the
that's
capital
another
budget.
really good point, as
Well,
opposed to,
exactly.
how come there's so few articles this year and there were many last year, as
Right,
opposed
you're
to,
doing a one-off.
here they are.
Right.
Good point,
It
though.
actually streamlines the process and makes it better.
Moderator gave us that charge. Okay, so any further discussion? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion, no, second.
We have a motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, and you can call us out, FCAT at 8:34.
Hey, look at that.
Not even 9 o'clock yet. It's tried and we tried.